Hello, my name is Clint Gilchrist and I'm director of the Museum of the Mountain Man. Today we're out on the Lander Trail, a cutoff of the Oregon Trail. We're standing in the swales right at the crossing of the Continental Divide, just a few hundred yards from the Little Sandy River. And this is a location it's a crossing. Immigrants cross the Continental Divide, cross the South Pass essentially, that people really don't know about. So I want to tell you a little bit about it. Let's back up a little bit and talk about what the South Pass was. In the early 1800s, when Lewis and Clark went across the country, they went up the Missouri River and through the northern part of what's now the United States. Their whole idea was to find this mythic pass between the headwaters of the Missouri and the headwaters of the Columbia, and they thought there'd be this short portage to go between the two so that there would be a river course across the country. They never found that. There's all kinds of mountains up there, and that was not what they found, but everybody kept talking about this mythic South Pass. There must be a pass south of where Lewis and Clark went through that would be this place where one river drainage would connect with another, and that really did exist and was eventually found, and that's why it's called South Pass. The traditional South Pass was, and what most immigrants used, followed up the Sweetwater River. The Sweetwater River comes out of the mountains right in front of me, comes out and goes almost south to north, makes a big swing and heads east. And so most immigrants and even the natives and the mountain men and people that came before them traveled along that Sweetwater River. Where that big bend is, they would cross the Sweetwater River and go up over the Continental Divide just a couple miles after crossing the river, and they would drop down and hit Pacific Creek, which eventually flowed into the Big Sandy River. And so there really was this place that you didn't have a very long stretch that you could cross the South Pass. But the part that people don't really realize is we're about 16 miles northwest of that location, of the traditional location. And this was a location that was used for a long time too and became part of the Lander Trail. Before it was made into the Lander Trail, as early as 1812 is when Robert Stewart of the Astorians coming across the country from the west to the east, coming back from Fort Astoria. He came right through this area, came through the Green River Valley, stopped at the area that's now Pinedale, Wyoming, and there was a big Indian encampment. There was a abandoned Indian encampment there, but it was a huge group of Crow. And so all the way coming towards South Pass, he's following this huge swath of trail that's fresh. The Indians had just crossed it, so all the animal tracks and the travois tracks, and it scared them. There was only 7 of those guys together, and they did not want to run into these Indians because they didn't know what would happen. So they actually swung way far south and crossed the South Pass on the very south end of the pass. But for anybody traveling those Crow Indians that came through here, that trail almost certainly would have come right through here, because you're following the foothills of the Wind Rivers. When you get down here to the Big Sandy River, you cross it, come over and cross the Little Sandy River where we're at, and then you cross the Continental Divide, which is just a few feet behind me. And so that's probably that big trail that they were following and avoided in 1812 likely came right through this part. So then from then on, this was a common crossing. If you were trying to cross and go directly west, you'd probably cross the traditional route and hit the Big Sandy River down further south. But if you were going north and wanted to follow the foothills of the Wind Rivers, this is where you would cross. The mountain man used this very early on because they were crossing, especially when the rendezvous started happening on the Green River at Horse Creek. The mountain man and the caravan that came would come through this route. So this is in the 1830s. This would have been a very common route for the mountain men. And even like in 1836, when Narcissa Whitman and Eliza Spalding, the missionary wives, came to the rendezvous of 1836, they would have crossed right here instead of the traditional South Pass crossing. And then after the mountain men, even like in 1842, when John Charles Fremont came through on his first expedition, he came along the foothills of the Wind Rivers, would have come through this crossing, followed the foothills up north, and eventually climbed what's now called Fremont Peak, wanting to climb the highest peak in the Rockies is what he thought he was doing. So by 1857, when Frederick Lander was trying to find a cutoff that would go further north than the traditional trails, this became an obvious place to cross the Continental Divide and cross the Little Sandy. And so then you can see now the ruts that I'm in. This probably came from the immigrant era. In 1859, when this was first used by immigrants on the Lander Trail, 13,000 people traveled this just that first year. So probably 50,000 traveled it over a 10-year period is a rough estimate. I would say at least that much. And I think that's what's created these ruts that are here. So I just wanted to point out, this is when people talk about crossing South Pass and crossing the Continental Divide, there's the traditional crossing 16 miles southwest of us, but this was a very prominent crossing too.